to the first installment of our Winter Warmer Speaker Series, and we're very glad that everybody could make it. We have a great turnout here. And let's see, aside from tonight's presentation, I just want to remind everyone that we will have 3 other special activities scheduled over the next few months. It will send you a reminder email, obviously Chloe at work this time, so we'll send you an email each week in advance of these things. And while I'm at it, I want to thank Chloe DiTomaso, who's here with us this evening, for all of her assistance in putting these presentations together. Thank you, Chloe. As far as the upcoming events, next Saturday evening, we look forward to welcoming Bruce Strickrock. Bruce is the Chief Pilot and Group Manager of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's human-operated submersible, the Alba. So that ought to be pretty interesting. On Saturday, February 15th, bring your sweetheart and your dancing shoes and keep the Valentine's love going while you trip the light fantastic to our own John Whalen, DJ extraordinaire and host of the popular local radio show American Pie, broadcast every Saturday morning from 6 to 10 a.m. on WORM FM in Provincetown. John's repertoire highlights the golden age of rock and roll from the 50s to the 70s, and I'm sure he'll be his tunes will keep your toes tapped at the beat. There's a few other seats up front here, folks. There's plenty of room if there's nobody. On Fridays, finally on Saturday, February 19th, our guest speaker will be Don Wilder, local storyteller, historian, lecturer, and author who will speak to us about his book, Henry Beston's Cape Cod. Mr. Wilding's book tells the fascinating story behind Beston's nature classic, The Outermost House. You may also want to note, folks, that we will begin accepting reservations for the Easter weekend activities, the always fun kids cookie decorating party, and Easter Sunday on April 12th. We're going to start taking those reservations in mid-February, actually on the 11th to be precise. And our a la carte dining this spring begins the weekend after Easter. So, it's now my pleasure to introduce this evening's special guest lecturer. Dr. Michael Pregot's CV is lengthy and impressive. Dr. Pregot holds degrees and professional certifications from some of the leading educational institutions in the country, including Harvard University, Bennington College, Boston University, and Middlebury College. His distinguished career in the world of academia includes assignments at the University of West Georgia, Long Island University, and Iona College, to name but a few. In addition to his teaching, Dr. Pregot has served in a number of administrative roles in several central Massachusetts school districts. Aside from his various professorships and consultancies, Dr. Pregot's articles and research papers have been published in a number of leading journals, and he is the sole author of a textbook entitled Successful School Staffing Strategies, Implications to Improve Student Learning, published by Rowman and Littlefield Press. While Dr. Pregot's career is highlighted by his many accomplishments in the field of education, he has always been fascinated with studying historic events, geographic facts, and daring deeds. Thus, in his retirement, he has transformed himself into an amateur historian. Here to fascinate us with tales of Cape Cod sea captains of the 1800s is Dr. Michael Pregot.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike Pregot. Call me Mike. It's okay. I'm not sure who invited me here, but whoever did it, I want to find out who that is. I want to get to know. I appreciate being here. It's an honor for me to be here. Can you hear me back there? My voice carrying okay? Speak up a little bit. Okay. Put my voice right there on mic. Okay. So welcome. What I'm going to talk to you today about is primarily sea captains who come from Cape Cod. Many come from Chatham, not all, but some come from Chatham. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Chatham history. And if I make any errors, there's a lot of local people here, so I'll be in big trouble. So bear with me if I make a blooper. But I do a lot of reading, I do the best I can, but I'm subservient to the facts. I'll try to be as accurate as possible. Where are you from? Okay, can you hear me better now? Yeah. That better? Okay. Right. Thank you. So actually, let me tell you what got me going on this. I'm a member of another golf club in Brewster. The captains, and as you know, every hole in the captains is named after a sea captain. So I went to the head pro there, Mark O'Brien, I said, Mark, what can I read about these captains? He said, we don't know. There's nothing written about it. So I said to Mark, I said, well, let me begin doing some research about that. So I have one tiny little book already published about the sea captains from the Brewster Golf Club. And there are 36 of those guys. Every hole is named after a different captain. So if you're really bored and want to read something, it's not a bad book. It's a cute little book. I'll begin by telling you a little bit about different kinds of ships. Because as I talk, I might be using words like brig or schooner or whatever. So I figured you should know. A brig is kind of an old-fashioned word, but any large boat with two masts, could be three, but two or three, is a brig. They don't use the word brig that much anymore. Brigantine, you hear that sometimes too. A schooner is kind of the shape of the boat. A schooner is very flat, very narrow boat. So if you hear the word schooner. A bark, sometimes they spell it the French way, the Spanish way, the barca, or English bark. But a bark is also a two-masted ship. Clipper is designed for speed. If you look on the ship, on the picture on the left, like little holes in the port, a galley is any kind of boat that you put an oar into. So if you can make any kind of boat into a galley boat, if you add oars to it. And the reason they have galley, quick turns, sometimes they're in tight spots, sometimes they're going to get out, sometimes the wind dies entirely. So they put the men to work and they have to kind of work hard. They get the boat to move, but by using the oars. The clipper ship, clipper is kind of built for speed. Clipper is a very tiny little boat, narrow. Doesn't carry a bunch of weight, but it does exist for moving merchant and people around. And then finally, you got different kinds of boats. The steamers came about 1840, but they improved every year. About 1850, steamers became, can you hear me again? It seems like the mic is going lower. Can you hear me still? Okay. Steamer kind of is a boat that has both powers, has oar power, sail power, as well as motion power, has both. And they improved. By 1870, steamers are moving along at a rapid rate. There were steamers in the 50s and 60s, 1850s, but they were not as powerful as the steamers of the later vintage. You might hear that. That particular one, the port one, I don't know if you heard about that, but in 1898, the port of Portland was a terrible storm. And they still to this day call it the Storm of Portland. Because that entire boat went under, and I forget how many people, 200 people maybe died in that disaster. So that was 1898. That was a while ago. What did the ships look like? They advertised it everywhere. Newspapers, you would be walking down the street in Boston, could be Brewster, could be Chatham, could be anywhere, and you would find a poster like that on the wall. And the poster would tell you where the ship was going, what the price would be. These two examples I showed you here are from 1850, 1842. That's kind of the beginning of the gold rush period. So a lot of men, particularly men, with $75 to go one way, from here to Boston to San Fran. If you wanted a real fancy cabin for $150, you can get a really nice cabin. But you get a bargain rate. It's really not too bad a deal. But they would talk about the size of the ship, what it carried. Some ships took people, some did not. Some people had a cargo and no passengers. Some had a few passengers, some had a lot of passengers. Some captains really liked the cargo, and some captains preferred just give me a few people. I just want to deal with the things, the animals, whatever it might be of the day. So depending on who the captain was, would make a difference. Let's talk about the beginning of the U.S. Navy. Here's a poster that existed from right before 1776. It's from Beverly, but it says, "Now fitting for a privateer in the harbor of Beverly, a strong, good vessel for that purpose, the Washington, and a prime sailor. Any seaman or landman that has an inclination to make their fortune in a few months, please apply." But don't forget, when our country began, we didn't have a navy, we didn't have an army. We're not a country. We didn't have anything yet. We had to evolve into a country, so we didn't have anything. So how do they get people to join? They would put signs like that up in Boston, Beverly, and wherever, and people would say, "We got a deal for you. You could be a privateer." Fancy word. All it meant was you could be a pirate, basically. Privateer is an individual with permission. You can attack another boat. That's basically what it is. explain about that to you a little more in detail. John Kendrick, he was a local guy, came from Orleans. Kendrick was a very famous captain. You might see different streets along in Chatham and Orleans, different places. You see Chatham Drive, Kendrick Drive, and so on. He was actually in all three wars. He was involved with the French and Indian War, the American Revolution War, and he was in the War of 1812. He was involved as a sea captain. But he was a privateer to begin with. His boat originally was not a Navy boat, but it was a boat that would be used to attack other boats with permission. So it's kind of a good deal. You get to be a pirate and get paid to do it. Not a bad deal. He was a very modest man. He began the first trade to the Northwest Passage. So he went into the Vancouver, right above Seattle, Washington, right in that area right there. And the way he made his money was he learned the language. Many Indian tribes were there. John Jacob Astor, the trading areas were there. But he learned the native Eskimo, native Intuit language. So he'd be willing to go to every town and speak to the natives and say, "Here's, let's make a deal. You know, I got something to trade. What do you have? Here's what I have." And he would learn that, and he learned that really well. In fact, he wrote a dictionary about the Indian native language from that area. So he's quite a bright guy. I didn't know this until I found out that there is a museum called the Kendrick Museum. It's only open like very little bit, but it's right down the road in Wareham. So that's a picture of it right there. It's only open on weekends, like certain times, certain days. I've never been to it myself. I'll get down there one day. But there is a Kendrick Museum. I guess a lot of the artifacts of Kendrick are located right there. But that's a picture right there. That man with the wave of the American flag is John Paul Jones. And he was a privateer. So the boat that Kendrick would take would be very much like that. The American people would say, you know, we understand that the British brig in town or a schooner or whatever, your job is to go out and use it to move it around or to attack it, to whatever it might be, to advocate for taking the boat. So there's no picture of Kendrick there, but he might be right in that picture. Another captain from Brewster, Elijah Cobb. Cobb was a very interesting guy. Elijah Cobb was, you've heard of the Barbary pirates in Tripoli, the holes of Montezuma to the shore of Tripoli. Well, there was a group of North African pirates called the Barbary pirates. And Cobb was responsible for attacking them. And he had a lot of information about them, so he knew what he was doing and how to do it. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, we're going to talk more about salt works later. But a lot of the towns, Orleans, Chatham, Brewster, had salt works. In the War of 1812, British put their gunboats right here, right to the edge of the water, and say, if you don't give us a ransom, we're going to blow your salt works entirely up. So he negotiated. Orleans never paid, by the way. They got away. Orleans never paid, by the way. Brewster paid. So poor Brewster people, they probably shouldn't have done it. And they did what they thought was right. His home is also now available. If you go to Lower County Road in Brewster, his home is now becoming the Brewster Historical Society. So it's kind of a nice little thing to go through. I think to open it Friday and Saturday, different times. I'll tell you one little story about him. He took two quick stories. One, when England passed a law that you could not sell the alcohol at all unless you pay a fine to the British. So he went to Ireland, had a big rum, merchandise on his boat, and told the men, he said, how can I do anything? So it was kind of a bribe. The people would say, we are members of the royal, they kind of pretended that they're seizing it, and they're going to bring the rum back to England. Well, they seized it, but they never got to England. And they all got a little recompense for doing that. So he was known to make a kind of a good deal now and then, Mr. Cobb was. He also, one more quick story about him. He had during the war, the English against the French war, he was sailing along the coast, seized the boat, the French did, and took it away. So he said, how dare you take my boat? That's not very nice. So he went inland. They took his boat, he went inland to see Robespierre in Paris. This was right in the middle of the revolution of the Reign of Terror. So he was a brave man. I mean, nobody would even want to be anywhere near that area. But actually, he got there, he talked to Robespierre 2 days before Robespierre got killed. They think that they're not sure. They think he was there when he was executed, but they're not sure of that. But anyway, he became a real negotiator. So the way he negotiated deals around the country with the boat became like a model for other captains. Le Cab is there on the right, and there is Robespierre on the left. Captain Mayo is another one. Captain Mayo he's kind of a famous captain. Very large man, they say 6'5", booming voice. His daughter, Sarah Mayo, and Louise Cobb, the other captain I showed you, with two girls who were very close, they were close friends. They began the library. I don't know if any of you have been to the Brewster Ladies Library, but those are the two young ladies who began that whole process. They first began out of their home, and then they got another captain to give them a house, and they got the house, and they got some money from other captains. So this eventually evolved into the ladies' library, which is kind of an interesting fact. One thing that Captain Mayo did was when he was over in France, the French emissary contacted him and said, "Would you be interested in taking Napoleon to America?" And he was saying, "Sure, I'll be glad to. You pay me?" He was okay with that. So right before the end of before Napoleon was actually taken and brought to Elba, he was going to take him back. What might have changed a lot of things for Napoleon. He was very popular, by the way. One thing I did not know, but the more I read about Napoleon during the time period, he was like idolized by a lot of Americans, which I find very fascinating. I don't know why, but apparently he was a very popular figure. A very dashing, handsome, whatever it might be, man, but he was very, very popular. It would have been interesting if he had come over here. But anyway, they see that picture with Napoleon there with the hand and the thing. There's a lot of rumors, kind of a bad rumor, that he had a deformed hand or a short hand or whatever it might be. It's not true. I was reading about the painter, the famous painter, Jean-Jacques David. And David thought that was nobility. When you put your hand like that, that means that you're a well-heeled, well-respected man. So that's what that picture's all about. But it's a nice library, though, by the way, if you ever want to get the Brewster. Lionel, another guy. Have you been to Lionel House over in Orleans, the restaurant? It's a great restaurant, good place, very pretty, good food. My wife and I go there fairly frequently. Captain Lionel was also a very famous captain in his day. The Eagle Wing was known to have very quick time to go to Europe and so on. One of his trips, he was actually captured one time. And he talked the way out of getting captured by just bribing them, just saying, "They'll give you direct money." He went one time to Marseille, France, and he saw a beautiful mansion, beautiful villa, and he actually took the plans. He had a friend of his took the architectural design, and that's what he replicated his house to be. So even the furniture, if you look at the furniture in his home, it's all French period style. It's quite a nice house. One thing I'll mention, that's actually, if you go in the restaurant, you'll see those pictures right there. Lionel is on the left, and his wife is on the right. And one thing he did, captains are pretty innovative people, but they were bored, they found things to do for the most part. So what this captain did was he designed a new rigging. One thing I didn't know. Most of those riggings, you see all those numbers and all of that, they have patents. The U.S. Patent Office was opened in 1780. Even before they had the official, right in the beginning of our country. So basically, he had 2 patents for 2 rigs that became very popular. So he made some money off that too. They were ingenious people on his campus. William Freeman, if you're familiar with another Brewster resident, the Freeman Inn, his house is still open to the public. You can stay there. It's a great bed and breakfast, by the way. One thing I found interesting about him, the name of the boat seemed to reflect what he was into. Because, one time he was on a boat called the Monsoon, and guess what? He was hit by a monsoon. One time he had a boat called the Undaunted, and his crew mutinied on him. So he didn't have he had a tough life, but he did okay. He did all right. One reason why ships would go on fire, his boat one time, two of his boats actually went on fire. The reason why they would go on fire, I'll give you 3 reasons. Carry coal, guano, and loose wood. When you think about coal, if you're in coal can self-combust. If you put coal, there's no air, or you don't have the right combination of air to it, it can just start on flame. Same thing, guano, you know what that is, of course, that's combustible fuel too, it's a fuel, right? And then wood lights wood, of course. So actually, they were carrying very dangerous cargo. A lot of these guys made some good money, but what they carried on them, and when the ship caught fire, you were in trouble. So yeah, what do you do if you're in the middle of the ocean and you're caught on fire? They don't have Coast Guard, they don't have fireboats. You were pretty much, when they say lost at sea, I'd say most of the time that's what they mean. It means your ship is damaged, just gone. Could be pirates, but more than likely it could be fire. A lot of the early captains would be fire. What do I do wrong? Something wrong?
Move your arrow. There you go. Oh, that's it. Just click. There you go.
You got it. Thank you, Chloe. That's, by the way, the mutiny on the boundary. It's not his mutiny. It's a different mutiny, but I got a picture of the mutiny on the boundary. That's the picture of that. The mutinies were interesting. Some captains had a lot of problems with mutinies. Because what would happen, how would they get their seamen? How they got them. Many captains would acquire men who they knew and families they knew. That would be fairly safe if they did it that way. But sometimes they had a thing called impressment, which meant that if you were drinking in a bar in New Bedford, and they just wake up one morning and you're going to be on the ship. They just took you. They literally just took you without talking to you, without any degree. They took it from prisons, they took it from orphanages, they took it from everywhere. So it depends who your crew was. Sometimes these people did not want to be there. But if you had a good crew, you were lucky. Most people, but there were quite a few mutinies on many of these ships. Trey Henry Sears, another interesting captain. One thing I found interesting doing my Brewster research was there's a golf course, as you know, called the Captain's. He had a 9-hole course on his property, in 32 acres, called the Captain's Golf Course. This is back in 1875 maybe. So this predates, a lot of things. Predates a lot of, but many people don't know there was a Captain's course way before that Captain's course. He was also a member of the Pilgrims Club. Pilgrims Club was a group of wealthy men, many of whom were descendants of the Mayflower. So they were very proud of their heritage. They were proud of the fact that they come from the Mayflower tradition. So what did they do? They wanted to build the Pilgrim Monument. So that's exactly what it did.
Just could you go back to the other slide?
Sure.
I saw something really interesting. Where did it go? He scuttled his ship in mid-ocean. Why would he do that?
He was attacked. They had no choice. I mean, he was going to be killed if he didn't get off board. So he had to leave.
What did he do?
How was he saved?
Give good news and bad.
Did you want to be a sea captain back then? If you don't mind, I think I'll take questions at the end. I don't want to discourage you, but I gotta.
Sorry.
It's okay. Sorry. I'll take questions at the end. I will take questions at the end.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Her question? No, I'd rather not. That's all right. I'm sorry. There's a Pilgrim Monument right here. It's called a campanile, which is a fancy word for bell tower. It's the largest bell tower in the U.S., 257 feet high. So you can see this almost anywhere. Anywhere on the Cape, you can kind of see an image of the Mayflower, the monument. He was very well connected. As you can see, when they put the first brick in, it was Teddy Roosevelt was there in 1902, and when they tried to finish it was Taft. So this man is very wealthy, very well connected. He had a lot of connections with national figures. Freeman Hatch from Eastham is another fellow who was an interesting fellow. He was prolific in going to Europe. He went to Europe and China many times, went to San Francisco many times. He was a big racing man. He had a ship called the Northern Lights, which is considered to be a very famous racing fast boat. And in fact, if you drive along 6A, on your left-hand side, there's a cemetery in Eastham called the Evergreen Cemetery. Pull over, stop sometime, take a look. You'll find his poster, his tombstone there, and it says right there, raced to San Francisco in 76 days, during the fastest time ever accrued by a seaman of his day. It's right on his tombstone. So he was kind of proud of what he was able to accomplish. The lighthouses in North Nusset? They're called the Three Sisters. Well, when he was a young man, he had 3 sisters in the house. They're all very known in the town, and people talked about them a lot. They're attractive. And they believe that the Three Sisters was named because of his 3 sisters. There's a connection there. Another guy which I found out interesting about was Jonathan Walker. Jonathan Walker was a sea captain who was also an abolitionist. So he was not a obviously anti-slavery, wanted nothing to do with slavery whatsoever. In his early days as a sea captain, there were a number of slaves, seven slaves, who wanted to go to the Bahamas. because they were being cruelly treated. They were going to be almost murdered where they were. So he agreed to take them. He agreed to take them from where they were, which was, I think, the Florida Keys, somewhere in there, to the Bahamas. Unfortunately, there was a law that was passed called the anti-slavery law, that if you help a slave who runs from his masters, heavy punishment, heavy punishment. He was captured by the U.S. Navy, and he was taken into control. And he was on board. Then they, one of the things they do, they pay a heavy fine, for one thing. He was there for 6 months in jail, had no bed, just a floor. They give him food on occasion. They didn't treat him all that well. But on top of all of that, they took a hot poker and they branded his hand, SS. They believed he was the only American who ever had his hand poked, branded in that way. They believed he's the only American who actually had SS stamped on his. But after this, they knew that the slavery was continuing. So after he did this little activity, he went to Michigan, went to Wisconsin, and the slave trade was actually going, believe it or not, he went in that direction. But he was there to talk against slavery in those states. He wrote a little tiny book called A Picture of Slavery in Use, which was going to be a primer. William Lloyd Garrison, the abolitionist, wanted to give his book to all the elementary schools so that maybe the spirit of anti-abolitionist spirit, never because caught in the North, didn't get to until the South. Never caught on. You can see the way they did it too. There's a U.S. Marshal. When he was after the trial, they just literally took the palm of his hand and just put the thing right there. They put SS, right? Just like you brand the cattle. Just put it right in the palm of his hand. They say he didn't yell. He was obviously in pain, but he just took the punishment. He just took it. I mean, it's kind of cruel, but that's what they did. Some vocabulary about pirates. Everyone likes to talk about pirates, but pirates always are kind of a fun thing to talk about. So just some terminology to work with here. A buccaneer, I thought you have a farm, you have corn, it's a buccaneer, and that's a different buccaneer. Anyone who works for the Spanish people, anti-Spanish. English would have a really hard time with the maritime against the Spanish. So if you commissioned your boat to take the seat of the Spanish boat, you were considered a buccaneer. That was primarily the term. A corsair is kind of an older pirate. They were actually the Barbary Coast, on the North Shore. You see these guys with these flamboyant blue pants on. Many of them speak French. They were the corsairs. They were ruthless. When they took your boat over, they didn't fool around. You were gone. You were pretty much gone. They took your boat over. And then, of course, the privateers is what we talked about before. So privateer, you could be commissioned by England. You could be privateered by America. You could be a privateer for France, Germany. Different countries had different wars going on. So they would have people be a privateer for them. So you could be an American over in Europe, and if England is fighting Germany, whatever it might be, the combination, you could just be a privateer with sanction, with impunity to do exactly what you're told to do. There are a few female pirates too, which I found interesting.
Doctor, please talk a little bit more directly into the mic.
Okay, sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Had a little trouble back here in the back.
Okay, all right. Yeah, all right, I'll do that. I'll do the best I can. So talk a little bit more about pirates. The Leader boat, you're probably familiar with this, but the Leader is in a museum you might go to in Dennis. Is it Dennis or Yarmouth? I forget. On the board of their kind. Yarmouth. And it's open to the public. I don't know if anyone of you have been there. I have not been there myself. But there's a famous guy named Barry Clifford who knew that a famous pirate boat, how did he know? Because in 1717, there was a boat that sank from a pirate, Captain Sam Bellamy, and two of the crewmen were captured, and they had a big trial. So they captured and brought to trial. And they said on the boat we had so many pounds of gold, so many pounds of tribute, and doubloons and all of that. So for 250 years, people knew within like a 20-mile area, they knew where that boat was, but they just couldn't get to it. So he figured out a way, this guy Clifford did. He had newer equipment. It was about 20 feet, 30 feet below the sand. The entire boat was there. So little by little, he began excavating and getting the treasure out. So if you go to the museum, you'll see a lot of the pirate booty right there. And it's also his. He made an agreement with the American government. He kind of planned, he was a bright guy. He said, if I dig this up, can I keep all of this for myself? But in return, I'm going to have a museum, I'm going to do this. He goes some contributory things to make a pirate. But he didn't have to pay tax either. He was a pretty bright guy. He knew what he was doing. He pre-vamped. He kind of knew he could get to it, so he kind of used that as leverage to make a deal. Here's a picture of the model. Actually, that's what the wheel looks like on the right. That's what the ship looks like. One thing for me, I always wondered, so many captains, and they seem like they died young. So just out of curiosity for me, I did a little research study, right, being a research guy, right? So I took about 130 captains who lived in this general area, and I found out what was the average lifespan to be, the chronological lifespan to be. And they found out that, believe it or not, in 1960, the average for the American male was 46 years old. Sounds horrible to think about that today, doesn't it? That's what it was back then. It was only 46 years of age. But then you look at the captains, and you look now, they're 18 in the 50s when they died, 17 in the 60s, and 9 in the 70s, and so on. So their age expectancy as a group, I mean, there certainly were a lot of exceptions to that, but they did pretty well. And I don't know if this the spirit, the spunk, I don't know, there's no cause of relation, I'm not sure. But it's interesting as a captain, as a group did okay. They did pretty well. I'm also going to go into a few minutes about other parts of Chatham. So I found it very interesting to go into the history of Chatham. I'm going to talk about natives, I'm going to talk about Squanto, and so on. So you probably know that the first people here were Malamornians, so the Indians who lived on this peninsula. So way before you guys had golf here, the Indians were here. They were living their life very comfortable. They live in Wetwood. I'm going to show you a picture of a Wetwood in a minute, what that looks like. When the first family, William Nickerson, came here, he said this particular peninsula you're on, the Native Americans can keep this. So we know for a fact that the Native Americans live right on this soil, right in here. This is where they were told that not the only place, but one of the places they could live with safety and with protection. He did kind of a smart thing, kind of a dumb thing. The first land that he acquired, Nickerson was the first individual to come to Chatham, first European man. He didn't like a lot of the things that the English were doing, the Puritans were doing in general. So one of the things he did, he said, I'm going to be by myself. He came here, he acquired a lot of land, even though he had to go to court to do it. Like in today's, like even back then, you have real estate, you got to file the deeds, to file the claims, and everything has to be done properly, and so on. Well, he bought a lot of land from the Indians, but never filed anything. So a lot of land, he owned a lot of land in Chatham, probably most of Chatham at one point, close to it, but only a little bit of it was actually legally acquired. Only did it the right way. The second time acquired it the second time. Here's a little map, two maps. One of the maps, you see the Indians were predominant in, obviously, everywhere, the Native Americans. Let's say the word Indian, let's say Native Americans, that's a given. Counter message, the Matakisi, the Pamits, Reverend Farrell, the Nausis were in this neck of the woods. The Malamornians, I mean, were Chatham, and also were more the eastern part. Matakisi was more in Hyannis, Shawnee was near Sandwich. So you can see they were all, by the way, part of the Iroquois nation. Iroquois was the generic term. They're all Wampanoags. Wampanoags is kind of they're all Wampanoags as well. But they all have a different division, like different tribes within a larger tribe. So they were here. They definitely were here in many different ways. The map on the right is a map taken by Samuel de Champlain, 1602. So he drove his boat into the harbor and found that there was a very inviting place. He thought it was a great place. He said, look how nice they have this. So he found the Indians. The Indians, if you notice, the Wet'suwet'en, that's not a Wet'suwet'en, that's one picture of a Wet'suwet'en. So every family had like their own plot of land, and maybe an acre, I'm not sure the exact dimensions, but a good chunk of land. They would grow vegetables, and that would be their territory. I don't think they paid property tax, but I'm not sure. I might have been a system. I'm sure there was a governor back then who wanted some money somewhere, I'm sure. So there you see a picture of a Wet'suwet'en, that's what it looks like. Kind of a big hut. They knew how to grow, they knew how to fish, they knew how to survive. They were definitely here for hundreds of years prior to the Europeans coming. So they were definitely well taken care of. The picture on your right was a tent. And England. And how did Chatham get its name? Because the naval shipyard in Kent, England, is called Chatham Yards. So when they came here, they say that a lot of the English looked at the size and the shape of the port and said, oh, this reminds me of the Chatham port, right? Reminds me of the shipyard in Chatham in Kent, England. So that's they say where the name came from. So probably some debate about, there's a debate about everything, but probably some debate about that too. I found out, which is interesting, and I won't go into it, but almost every town in the Cape has 2 or 3 variations of how the name came. That's another talk. All right, tell me about Squanto. Squanto was a very interesting fellow. Squanto was a Pawtucket, member of his tribe. He was captured back in the early 1600s. He was kind of a rogue shipper called Thomas Hunt. Wasn't supposed to do it, but he did it anyway. He took some Native American people and brought them to Europe as slaves. Wasn't supposed to, it wasn't a good tradition, it was definitely an immoral thing to do and a wrong thing to do, but Squanto was one of the people who was taken up and brought over. When the English people found out that Squanto was brought over, they said, rather than give him just to a family or to another individual, let's bring him to the Spanish monks. So that's where he went. When he was very young, he went to a Spanish monastery, and the Spanish people raised this young man up. He spoke English, he spoke a native language, he spoke English, he was a pretty learned man for a young fellow. He got a pretty good education from the monks. They schooled him very well. Then he came back to here. When the Pilgrims came here, they met Squanto. So they came off the boat, and they didn't know quite everything. They were looking around, and they had some confrontations and so on. And there, lo and behold, guy said, hey, how you doing? He spoke English. He was a man who spoke English to them. So it must have been quite shocking to them to have an individual who spoke their native language, spoke their indigenous language. He was the last of the Pawtuckets. When he came back, to show you the terrible, and which is true for almost every tribe, all the tribes, when they began interfacing, interconnecting with the Europeans, many of them either completely wiped out or partially wiped out through infections. Disease was rampant. Disease was a horrible thing. So I don't know coronavirus or what they called it back then, but it was a horrible thing that just kind of wiped out the whole tribe. And he came back, his entire tribe was gone. He was the last of the Pawtuckets. During his life, he was very valuable. You're going to find out much more. In 2 weeks, you got a fellow coming from the Mayflower. I know he's a lot of experts, much more than I do about the Mayflowers. He'll tell you much more about that part of history, I think. But when he was here, he actually went back and forth to Europe twice. He came back a second time to go back to visit his friends over in Europe, and then came back again. So he was kind of a travel Squanto. But he was a very, very intelligent man, very calm, they say, very serene kind of fellow. And what do we know about Squanto? We believe the Nickerson family, the Nickerson Association across the street there, they are positive, and this is not me talking, this is them, okay, that Squanto is buried on your golf course. Squanto is buried, they think, somewhere near the 6th hole. So, again, I didn't put him there, I don't know. There have been some people who might debate that, but a lot of people, majority of people, the Nickerson people in particular, believe there's no doubt about it, that he's definitely here on your golf course, at least on the land. That's part of your golf course today. Because he was so connected with the English, he wanted a white man's burial. So one of the things he told us is, when I die, please give me a white man's funeral, because he believed that if he died here, and they gave him a white man's funeral, he would go to the white man's God. And he thought that was but they didn't have a concept of eternity or forever, mortality. They had a little different Indian belief than we have. So one of the things he requested, and they accommodated him. He did not want to be living in Chatham in the early 1600s. The first 100 years in particular were really, really tough. By the year 1690, there were people here, but only 17 families lived in the Chatham area, which is not very many. The original settlers in 1620 from the Mayflower, 7 families came here, the Doans, Atwoods, different groups. They all came here to live here in Chatham. So it wasn't really popular. But when you think about it, what was happening in that time period? French and Indian War, the American Revolution. So you were being attacked by the French, by the Indians, by the British. There's a lot of mayhem going on, a lot of tough setup. And plus, they didn't know that much about fishing or agriculture. They didn't know indigenous farming techniques. There were some, but not many. This is the pre-Squanto, so they did not know a great deal about it. But finally, by about 1830, more things happened. By 1830, the whaling industry became a little bit better. Salt works, I'm going to show you more about salt works in a minute. Fishing and farming. There are 2,100 people living here. That's a pretty big gap in a short period of time. So that was kind of when China became into it. A lot of Cape Cod homes came into their own between 1800 and 1830, kind of stabilized. Let me just tell you briefly how they did the whaling method. Whaling in the early days, I'm talking like the 1700s, were not this big, like Moby Dick kind of boats where they had everything on the boat, and the cook is called tries, that's how they cook the whales, out like a big cauldron. It was just basically men going out in like little dories and throwing javelins or spears at them, attacking them, and then bringing them into 3 or 4 boats to get together, kind of corral the poor whale and kind of bring them into port that way. That's how they did that for a good 50 years or more. So that was the original days of whaling. Back then, the whales were more plentiful, so they were able to do that. By the way, once 1820 came, there were very few whales in this neighborhood. They would have to go to the northern coast, where Kendrick was, in the northwest period. They would have to go to the Arctic to get to the whales. The only country today that legally does whaling is Japan. They for some reason, Japan didn't outlaw it. All the other countries outlawed whaling completely. Salt works are a big thing. If you look at every town in Cape Cod, all 15 of them, you're going to find salt works road, salt work avenue, salt work, a couple of salt works here in Chatham. There was a salt work almost in every town. It began in 1790 with a captain from Dennis, Sears, who kind of said, again, these guys know how to make a buck. These guys, they know how to make money. So one of the things they did was, it would take ocean water and then find a solar energy way, kind of like the sun evaporated, and make salt. And why was salt a commodity? Because don't forget, in that period, there was no refrigeration. They had to keep their meats, they had to keep everything solvent. And so salt was a big commodity, and people were willing to pay money to get salt. So that was a good product, a good venture for a Cape Cod fellow to do. They had a salt works. This is kind of an elaborate one. Every year they would get better. 1700s is kind of a rough salt works, but then they found out ways to use a windmill and to connect it to get more ocean in, and they could take it to boats and then really make it fancy. Some of the salt works were quite elaborate. So there was like a process. First they take an ocean water, then they have a drying room, then they have a pickle room or an in-between room, and eventually there's two ways of condensing it so it becomes salt. So it became quite big. Up until about 1840. After 1840, for some reason the salt industry went to the Great Lakes. It doesn't make sense for me, but it did. For some reason, I don't know why. Just Cape Cod did not do too much of the salt works after 1840. You know about the word moon cusser. You know what a moon cusser is, right? Well, I hate to tell you this, but a lot of Chatham people were moon cussers. There was a good number of you, maybe your relatives, I don't know, could be. But the moon cusser basically were people who were trying to lure ships to come near the shore. So they would kind of wave a light, or they'd do something to intrigue people, and people would say, oh, look, a light, look. And by the time they get close, they'd be on shoals, which is exactly what they wanted. They wanted the boat to shipwreck, so they can claim it. Back then, the laws were pretty loose. If a boat went on shore, it was like a freebie. You can kind of claim it. You can kind of fight off the people, and you can kind of dictate what you wanted to do. It was so common in Chatham, for some reason, that even Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem, and inside the poem, I found a phrase that says, "Ye scavengers of Chatham," and it goes on and on and on after that, so we know that. It was happening here for some reason. They used to call them Judas lights. Have you heard Judas lights term before? It was like a light they used to use, kind of Judas, the enemy, so to speak, kind of negative thing. And I'm not sure exactly where Wicked Hill is, but somewhere in Chatham was a Wicked Hill, where a lot of these moon cussers would hang around. So anyone live on Wicked Hill? So you can see when it looks, it's kind of interesting because if you were, some people actually call those scavengers. Scavengers were kind of legal. Scavengers meant when you found a boat and you could help yourself. They didn't cause the accident. They didn't do anything to predicate it. They just happened to take the benefit from it. They were scavengers. That would be kind of legal, okay. But then there were people called either moon cussers or wreckers, and they did illegal things to entice you. So depending on what you were, maybe you call yourself one, you really were the other, who knows. But in a court of law, you may have to kind of prove that you were legitimate, because you would do it the right way. But there are hundreds upon hundreds. From 1800 to 1830, there were probably no less than 400 ships probably who got caught up in different storms in different ways. Not all moon gusts, but different ways that got caught up in this neck of the woods. Did you know there was a battle at Chatham Harbor? One of the Revolutionary War battles was fought right here in Chatham. 1782, there was a boat that came on the board, a lot of brigantine. They seized a vessel. The British got on board an American vessel, a brigantine, and they were going to sail back to England. When our militia heard about it, they got their guns, and they got their, the Minuteman came running right out, and 50 people came running out really quickly and began shooting and attacking that boat. So much so that the boat kind of went on the shoals. So the boat couldn't make it out of the harbor. They kind of thwarted the British from getting the big boat. There were two other boats involved. They got out. The little boats got out, but not the big one. The big one, they were able to save that boat. I keep hitting. I must have fast fingers, I guess. I'm sorry. My fingers keep getting in the way here. So you probably know about this too, but the lighthouse, that was a very plum job. If you were the keeper of a lighthouse, that was a federal appointment. The president usually directly made an appointment for a lighthouse. It wasn't even a senator. Sometimes senators, but most of the time it was the president who said, you could be the keeper of the Chatham Light, or this light, or that light. That was a pristine job to have in its day. In 1790, of course, we had a version of it. We had the Coast Guard. It wasn't called the Coast Guard then. It was called the Revenue Service. It was called the Coast Guard. It wasn't called Coast Guard. It was called the Revenue Cutter Service. And basically, they did that for protection. Many of the boats would be coming into America, and they tried to get the different products going. Maybe illegals. It wouldn't be drugs back then. It might be oil. It might be alcohol. Nefarious things. And they were doing some sneaky things with boats back then. So these revenue cutters, they weren't getting their fair share of taxes. They said, we got to get our share of money here. So 1790 is when they began that service. There's also, as you know, there are also life-saving stations along the coast right here, all the way from B-Town, Provincetown, a lot of life-saving service. So those two agencies combined in I'm not sure exactly the year, early 1800s, to become the Coast Guard. That's where we have today. There were, by the first one, by the way, was 1808. There was a wooden tower lighthouse in Chatham, not too far from where this one is, but very close to the edge of the waterhouse. And then eventually became steel, eventually became a little better product. All right, I got to tell you about the Squire in Chatham. Now, maybe some here knows the definitive answer. I couldn't get the definitive answer, so I'm going to reach out to you. You're local people, much more than me. There was a very famous resident living in Chatham whose name was Richard Sears. And he was called the Squire. Everyone in town called this man the Squire. Very popular man, very well-known man. And what he was known for was a number of things. He kind of dressed like the old-fashioned guard. He was dressed in the 1790s with the wooden stockings and the peruche, the white wigs that they were wearing today. He served in town. He was very popular. He owned pretty much where the Chatham Bar's Inn. He owned 30 acres of land up there, at least 30 acres. So he had a lot of territory. But he was well connected to presidents, senators. Everyone knew he was a member of your Chatham, whatever the equivalent was back then, the Senate, whatever it might happen to be called back then. Good friends with Noah Webster, Otis, and Josiah Quincy. Those last two guys are the revolutionary. You ever hear the Sons of the Revolution, Sons of the Patriots? Well, those two men were kind of the patriots who began this whole Revolutionary War thing. So he was right in the middle of getting the Patriot cause underway. He was also a militia man in Chatham. They think he was at Yorktown too when they finally the British kind of surrendered to. I'm not sure. I think he was there. So let me tell you about two of his friends. These guys were hanging around Chatham a lot. There's records of them being both in Chatham many times. James Otis and Noah Webster. So if you're familiar with the names, you probably know the names. I can tell you some quotes. I know you know the quotes. James Otis made the quote, "Taxation without representation is tyranny." So that was James Otis. That was him. Also, he made a statement in court, "You can't take that man's home from him. It's his castle. A man's home is his castle." You've heard that quote before. So that was also what's his. Now, Noah Webster was an interesting guy. He and Marion together were scholars of the language, linguistic scholars, and they did a lot of dictionaries, the Webster Dictionary and so on. He took a lot of the words that were being used in America and kind of standardized them. He's saying the British have, they spell color weird. They spell the word theater differently. draft beer, draft whatever. So he said, let's get a standard American language. So when you look at the dictionary, they have more than just the word. They have the spelling, pronunciation, all of that. So he was one of the fellows who kind of standardized our American language for us, which is different than the British language. Another sea captain, Joseph Atwood from Chatham, a local captain. He owned the land actually right around Stage Harbor. He was right there. He was a coaster. A coaster would be somebody who go up and down the shore. A coaster would be somebody who went to, from Maine down to Florida. They were kind of the eastern shore, basically what he did, a lot of what his trips were. A lot of his money was made by taking wood. He was a wood trader, but other things as well. One of the things he did, he paid informants to get information. So he would go into the harbor, and rather than pay taxes or do anything that you had to in a formal way, he would wait until the intelligent people, his intelligence, would say it's safe to come in. They would go in, do their trading, and then get out with it in the dead of night usually. So he was a pretty sharp kind of guy. Joseph Doan. I gotta tell you, this is probably a really big murder mystery story happened in Chatham. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. There was a ship called the Abigail, maybe about 5 or 6 miles off coast of Chatham here, who was in distress one day. So one of the captains, Captain Doan, saw the ship, got on board, and found one man alive. All the other people were bloody and dead, and the whole, it was a horrible scene. Everyone else was horrible. So he said, how come you're still alive? How'd you make it? What happened? So what the man claimed was that, well, he was a Nickerson man, Ansel Nickerson. He claimed that he saw the pirates coming, and he was able to lower himself by a rope and get to the bottom of the boat and kind of stay out of view. How that happened, I don't know. That's his claim. But all the other people did not make it. They were all murdered. And when they got on the boat, they found rum, they found empty rum cakes, and they found debris, and they found massacres and so on and so forth. So he said, I don't know what to make of this story. So he brought that man, Nickerson, into port, brought him to a judge, and they had a famous trial. This trial lasted about 5 months in Boston. And his lawyer, believe it or not, was John Adams, the future president. So they kept debating, well, we can't find him guilty, but he's innocent. So he actually, he's guilty until proven innocent. Was kind of one of the tenets of this trial. That, so we don't, to this day, he was never found guilty, but he wasn't found completely innocent either. So it was interesting how they looked at things back then. Okay, so I'm near the end. I want to take questions in a couple of minutes. Maybe 2 or 3 more slides. Atkins is also a Chatham fellow. There's a picture of it. He was on a boat called the Morning Star. Morning Star is being chased. He was captured by pirates, by a mutiny group of pirates, and they wanted to get information from him. He would not give them information. They chained him literally to a cannon. They chained him there, and they made him pay a ransom. And he said, I will not pay you. I said, well, you got to find a way. You got to at least make an agreement to pay me. He said, no. So this went on for like a couple of days. This poor man was tortured and bloodied and everything else. And the pirates said, you know what? You're a pretty brave guy. So what we'll do is we'll just let you go. So it's pretty unusual for them to do that. But the pirates, again, just kind of went their merry way, and Captain Atkins escaped everything. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is your golf lesson. I found a nice little book, I think 1922, somewhere there, about the origins of this golf lesson. So as you know, this territory of land that you have right here was, well, first was the Indians. Then there was actually a lot of merchant marine activity. A lot of sea captains lived here for a while. And then eventually was a hotel. So Eben Marsh, Jordan Marsh fame, Jordan Marsh, the store, he owned a lot of land right in this neck of the woods. Now the picture of the hotel as it stood back then. I don't think anyone's around in this room is sure saw this hotel. I don't think so. But it may be your grandparents did. Okay, so something, 1920, thereabouts, it was here. And there was a lot of beautiful land available, so he was able to acquire it. So a group of people got together, and they said, here's what we wanted in the golf course. They wanted to find, hold on, I'll make sure to go back, hold on. Go back. They wanted to have, Wendell was the president of the U.S., the entire country, Golf Association at the time. So he was in charge of the U.S. Golf Association. He said, let's build a championship golf course in America. He said, Cape Cod is the perfect place to have a championship golf course. Let's build it here. So they hired 2 people. A fellow by the name of Willie Parks, who was a surveyor and kind of knew land pretty well. I said, this spot is perfect. It's a great spot. I gave you as a handout. There is a handout available, by the way. I'm not going to read it to you, but it tells you a little bit more about the history that I'm going into right now. It tells you about the first year you could be a member here for $50. Pretty good deal. Pretty good deal back then. And anyone could join. Anyone could join. It's open to male and female, any age, but you have to have $50. $50 back then was a lot of money. So, but if you had it, you could join. So this land was actually desirable, very desirable. It was scouted and picked. And what were they looking for? Well, here's what they were looking for. These was in a book I found. Okay, in a book they wanted beautiful fairway turf, a nice putting green, coarse grass for the rough, white sand from the beach. You know, but above all, it should be playable, have heavy rain, good drainage, and a fee frame. This was that was why determined before they even built it. This was like in the drawing plans about how they wanted the golf course to be. So I found that interesting. That you have it. You met all the requirements. So you have a great golf course. I'm jealous. I'm envious. I wish I was a member. I'm not. But I have played it twice. I enjoyed it very much. Anybody want to invite me back? I'm available. Thank you very much. In Q&A, I guess I can take some questions if you have time. Yes, ma'am.
We live on Old Salt Works Road,
Yeah.
and I researched that over at the Museum of Natural History.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out that the reason it went out of business in 1840 was that in 1860, up in New York State, they found mining where they could find salt. And
Right.
the poor guy just completely went out of
It
business.
wasn't to the Michigan, New York State area,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So that-
Yeah, yeah. But it was a big moneymaker for Cape people. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of situations where the captains went from the East Coast to San Francisco or Vancouver or wherever. What was their typical route to do that?
Well, it depends what the
Repeat the question,
was.
please.
The question was, what was the typical route for the captain? There's so many captains, there's so many boats. It could be Europe, it could be the South Pacific, but there wasn't one typical route. I mean, they all did different things, depending on what they're commissioned to do.
No, but-
Cape of Good Horn was, a
But
lot
going
of different things.
going from here to San Francisco, what was the route?
Oh, they had to go down the Cape of Horn.
So they went down the Cape of Horn.
Panama
That
from
was-
now was not there anymore. Had to do the whole loop, they had to go all the way around.
How long took that? Like
82.
It depends, 76 days, 80 days, it was a great time. Typically 100 days, typically, but it could be any time. Took them a while. But for about $60, you could probably get a pretty good deal. You could probably go all the way to San Francisco if you wanted to. Yes, ma'am.
My mother used to tell me a story, and this could be totally apocryphal, but that Mr. McClennan, who owned 14 acres of land on the opposite shore, decided that he really didn't want to look at lights early at night, and so he convinced some of his wealthy Boston friends to create a golf course along this side. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that certainly is what I grew up hearing.
It could be. It could be elements of that. A group of wealthy men who began the whole project. So there's no question there was some wealthy local merchants who began the project to build it off of us. So it could be. It could very well be. Any other comments? Well, thank you for the opportunity very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
That was great. Yeah, it was very fun.
That's great. We'll enjoy it.
Was it staged or was it natural?
No, I think it was to be natural. That was I just want money. I just want to go to the pub. But money? Daddy goes to the pub.
They all